She walked into the building at exactly 5:47 a.m., just like she had done every morning for the past 3 years. Margaret Williams, a 54-year-old janitor, carried her worn cleaning supplies through the marble lobby of Sterling Tech Industries. What nobody in that building knew, what not a single executive in their pressed suits could have guessed, was that in less than 24 hours, Margaret would own every square foot of the empire they worked in. The CEO who fired her that morning had no idea he was about to lose everything to the woman he just humiliated in front of the entire staff. But here's where things get interesting. Before we get into what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Are you in New York, London, Toronto, Los Angeles? Drop your city below, because what happened in this office building is happening in workplaces everywhere. And I want to know if you've witnessed anything like this. Margaret had been working the morning shift at Sterling Tech for 3 years and 2 months. She started at 5:30 a.m. before any of the executives arrived, cleaning the executive floors of the 42-story building in downtown Chicago. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing, mopping, and polishing the offices of people who barely acknowledged her existence. But she never complained, not once. The CEO, Richard Sterling, was a different story altogether. He had inherited the commercial real estate company from his father, and in the 15 years since taking over, he had built a reputation, not for business acumen, but for something far uglier. The employees whispered about it in break rooms. They shared stories during after-work drinks. Richard Sterling treated people differently based on the color of their skin, and he didn't even try to hide it. Margaret knew the signs. She had seen them all her life. The way he would walk right past her without acknowledgement, the way he spoke to the white maintenance supervisor with respect, but snapped his fingers at her when he needed something, the way his lip would curl when he saw her eating lunch in the staff room. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Margaret rode the service elevator to the 40th floor, where the executive suites were located. She pushed her cart quietly, methodically working through her checklist. She had learned to be invisible in this building, but at 7:15 a.m., Richard Sterling arrived early. He was having a bad morning. His wife had confronted him about his spending. His accountant had called with concerns about his personal finances. And when Richard Sterling was having a bad morning, he needed someone to take it out on. He walked past Margaret's cart in the hallway, and she offered a polite good morning. He ignored her, as usual. She continued working, moving to clean the conference room, but then she heard it. The sound that would change everything, a crash. Her cleaning cart had been knocked over. Bottles of cleaning solution spilled across the expensive marble floor. Her mop, her supplies, everything scattered. She rushed out to find Richard Sterling standing there, his briefcase in hand, his face twisted in anger. "You left this cart blocking the hallway," he said, his voice cold. Margaret knew that wasn't true. She had positioned it carefully against the wall, the way she always did. But she also knew better than to argue with Richard Sterling. "I apologize, sir. I'll clean this up right away," she said quietly, bending down to gather the spilled supplies. "You people are all the same," Richard said, loud enough for the earlier, arriving executives who were stepping off the elevator to hear. "Lazy, incompetent, taking up space that could go to someone who actually wants to work." Margaret's hands stopped moving. She looked up at him, and for the first time in 3 years she spoke up. "I've been here since 5:30 this morning, Mr. Sterling. I work hard every single day." The hallway had gone silent. 3 executives stood frozen by the elevator. Richard Sterling's assistant had just arrived and stood motionless near her desk. Everyone was watching. Richard's face turned red, not from embarrassment, but from rage. How dare she speak back to him? "What did you just say to me?" Richard's voice was low, dangerous. Margaret stood up, cleaning supplies still in her hands. She was tired of being invisible, tired of being disrespected, tired of watching this man treat people like they were beneath him simply because of their skin color. "I said I work hard, Mr. Sterling. Every single day I come in early, I do my job, and I do it well." Richard Sterling took a step closer. "You don't speak to me like that. You don't get to have an opinion. You're a janitor. You're replaceable. Do you understand what that means?" There are 100 people who would take your job tomorrow. One of the executives, a woman named Patricia Chen, took a small step forward. Richard, maybe we should stay out of this, Patricia. Richard snapped without looking at her. His eyes were locked on Margaret. This is about respect. This is about hierarchy. This is about people knowing their place. Margaret felt something shift inside her. She had spent her entire life knowing her place. She had been told where her place was by people like Richard Sterling. Her grandmother had been told, her mother had been told, and she was done. My place, Margaret said quietly, is anywhere I choose to be. The hallway felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. Nobody breathed. Richard Sterling's assistant looked like she wanted to disappear into the wall. Patricia Chen pulled out her phone, and Margaret noticed she was recording. You're fired, Richard said, his voice sharp as a blade. Get your things and get out of my building. Security will escort you out. Your building, Margaret said, and something flickered in her eyes. Something that made Richard Sterling pause for just a fraction of a second. Yes, my building, Sterling Tech Industries. My name is on the door. My father built this company, and I decide who works here and who doesn't. You're done. Margaret slowly removed her work gloves. She folded them carefully and placed them on her cart. Then she removed the company ID badge from around her neck and set it down next to the gloves. I'll leave, she said, but you might want to check your facts about whose building this is. Richard laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Are you threatening me? You're a janitor making minimum wage. What are you going to do? Sue me. You can't afford a lawyer. You can barely afford rent. People like you don't win against people like me. That's just how the world works. People like me, Margaret repeated. Her voice was steady, but everyone in that hallway could hear the steel underneath. You mean black people, Mr. Sterling. Say what you mean. The color drained from Richard's face. He had said the quiet part out loud so many times, but having it reflected back at him, having a witness record it, suddenly made it real. I mean people with no education, no skills, no value to contribute, he said, scrambling. This has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with race, Margaret said. And everyone in this building knows it. They've known it for years. You've created a hostile work environment. You've discriminated against dozens of employees, and you've done it because you thought you were untouchable. Richard turned to his assistant. Call security, have her removed, and call legal. We're going to make sure she never works in this city again. Margaret picked up her bag. She looked at Patricia Chen, who was still recording. She looked at the other executives, their faces pale and uncomfortable. She looked at Richard Sterling, and she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something you didn't. I'll save you the call to security, Margaret said. I'll walk myself out. But I'll see you tomorrow morning, Mr. Sterling, bright and early. You won't be seeing anything except unemployment, Richard spat. Margaret walked to the elevator. She pressed the button and waited. The doors opened and she stepped inside. As the doors closed, she heard Richard Sterling shout, and good riddance, go back to wherever you came from. The doors closed. Margaret rode down to the ground floor in silence. She walked through the lobby where she had mopped the floors 1,000 times. She stepped out into the cool Chicago morning, and she pulled out her phone. She made a call. Mr. Patterson, it's Margaret Williams. Yes, I'm ready to move forward. Let's do it today. That afternoon, while Richard Sterling sat in his office feeling satisfied with himself, Margaret Williams sat in a lawyer's office in downtown Chicago. Across from her was James Patterson, a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Patterson asked, looking at Margaret over his glasses. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Margaret replied. Patterson nodded. Then let's talk about what you're actually buying. What Richard Sterling didn't know, what he couldn't have known because he never bothered to know anything about the people he considered beneath him, was that Margaret Williams was not what she appeared to be. 3 years ago, Margaret's husband had passed away. He had been a modest man, a factory worker who lived simply. When he died, Margaret discovered something he had never told her. He had been investing his entire life. Small amounts, consistently, in companies that others overlooked. When the final accounting was done, Margaret inherited an estate worth $47 million. She could have retired immediately. She could have moved to a mansion, traveled the world, lived in luxury. But Margaret was not that kind of person. She was the daughter of a cleaning woman and the granddaughter of a sharecropper. She believed in work. She believed in dignity. She believed that wealth without purpose was meaningless. So she took a job as a janitor. She wanted to understand how regular people lived, how they were treated, what their struggles were. She wanted to stay grounded. She wanted to remember where she came from. And she invested her inheritance carefully, watching it grow, waiting for the right opportunity. That opportunity had arrived 3 months ago when she learned that Sterling Tech Industries was in financial trouble. Richard Sterling had spent lavishly, made poor business decisions, and over-leveraged the company. The board was concerned. Investors were nervous. The company needed a bailout, and they needed it soon. Margaret had been working with Patterson for 2 months, quietly buying up shares through shell corporations. Small percentages here and there. Nothing that would trigger alarm bells. She now owned 31% of Sterling Tech Industries. She had arranged financing to buy another 23% from desperate investors who wanted out. That would give her 54%. Controlling interest. The paperwork is ready, Patterson said. The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Sterling doesn't know, none of them know. It's going to be quite a surprise. What about the recording from this morning? Margaret asked. Patterson smiled. Patricia Chen sent it to me an hour ago, along with recordings from 6 other employees documenting Sterling's behavior over the past 3 years. His racism, his discrimination, his harassment. It's more than enough for a termination with cause. He won't get his golden parachute. He won't get his severance, and given the company bylaws, he'll be forced to sell his remaining shares at market value, which has dropped 23% in the last quarter. Margaret sat back in her chair. I don't want him to lose everything. I'm not doing this for revenge. Patterson raised an eyebrow. Then, why are you doing this? Because companies like Sterling Tech employ hundreds of people. Good people. People who deserve better than Richard Sterling. And because someone needs to show men like him that the people they look down on, the people they think don't matter, those people have value. Those people have power. Those people can change the world. Patterson nodded slowly. You're going to make a lot of enemies doing this. I've had enemies my entire life. Margaret said, at least now I'll have the power to fight back. That evening, Richard Sterling sat in his penthouse apartment, drinking expensive scotch and celebrating his decisive action. He had called his country club buddies and told them the story, exaggerating the confrontation, painting himself as a no-nonsense leader who didn't tolerate insubordination. They had laughed and congratulated him on putting that woman in her place. His phone rang. It was David Morrison, the chairman of Sterling Tech's board of directors. Richard, we need to talk, Morrison said, his voice tense. Can it wait until tomorrow? I'm celebrating. Celebrating what? I fired that useless janitor this morning, the black woman who was always hovering around. Trust me, David, it was the right call. She was disrespectful, insubordinate. Richard, stop talking. Morrison interrupted. We have a serious problem. There's an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Attendance is mandatory. An emergency meeting? About what? I can't discuss it over the phone. Just be there. And Richard, you might want to bring your lawyer. The call ended. Richard Sterling stared at his phone, a small knot of worry forming in his stomach, but he pushed it away. He was Richard Sterling. He was untouchable. Whatever this was about, he would handle it the way he handled everything. With money, power, and connections. He had no idea that the world as he knew it was about to end. That night, Margaret Williams lay awake in her small apartment. She thought about her husband, about how proud he would be of what she was about to do. She thought about her mother, who had cleaned houses for wealthy families her entire life and died without ever owning anything. She thought about her grandmother, who had picked cotton in Mississippi and dreamed of a better world. Tomorrow, she would walk into that boardroom and claim what was rightfully hers, not through inheritance or luck, but through hard work, smart decisions, and the courage to stand up to men who thought they could treat her as less than human. She thought about Richard Sterling, about the shock he would feel when he realized what had happened, and she smiled in the darkness. At 7:45 a.m. the next morning, Richard Sterling walked into the Sterling Tech Industries boardroom. The entire board was already assembled, which was unusual. His lawyer, Kenneth Shaw, was beside him, looking nervous. "What's this about, David?" Richard demanded as he took his seat at the head of the table. David Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Richard, there's been a significant change in the company's ownership structure. We've called this meeting to address it." "Ownership structure? What are you talking about?" The door to the boardroom opened. Margaret Williams walked in, wearing a tailored business suit. Behind her was James Patterson and two other attorneys. Richard's face went white, then red, then purple. "What is she doing here?" he sputtered. "Security, get her out of here, Mr. Sterling," Patterson said calmly, taking a seat at the table. "My client has every right to be here. In fact, she has more right to be here than you do." "Your client?" Richard looked at Margaret as if seeing her for the first time. "What kind of game is this?" Morrison cleared his throat. "Richard, I'm going to need you to listen carefully. As of 7 a.m. this morning, Ms. Margaret Williams owns 54% of Sterling Tech Industries. She has controlling interest in this company." The room went completely silent. Richard Sterling's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "That's impossible," he finally managed. "She's a janitor. She doesn't have that kind of money." "I assure you, it's very possible," Patterson said, sliding documents across the table. "Everything has been verified. The transactions are legal and binding. Ms. Williams is now the majority shareholder and, as of this moment, the new CEO of Sterling Tech Industries." Richard looked at the documents, his hands shaking. He flipped through pages of share purchases, legal contracts, financial statements. It was all real. It was all true. "You," he said, looking at Margaret, "you did this. You planned this. How long? How long have you been working here, pretending to be a janitor, planning to steal my company?" "I didn't steal anything," Margaret said calmly. "I purchased it legally, and I wasn't pretending to be a janitor. I was a janitor. I did that job, and I did it well. You just couldn't see past your own prejudice to realize that I was more than what you assumed. This is corporate espionage. This is fraud. I'll sue you for everything you have." "You'll do no such thing," Morrison said firmly. "Richard, we've also been presented with evidence of your conduct toward employees. Discrimination, harassment, creating a hostile work environment. We have recordings, witness statements, documentation going back years. The board has voted unanimously. You are terminated, effective immediately." For cause, Richard stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. "You can't do this. My father built this company. My name is on the building. Your name will be removed from the building by the end of the week," Margaret said quietly. "And actually, your father didn't build this company. He built it on the backs of people like me. People he underpaid and mistreated. People who made him rich while he took all the credit. That ends now." Richard turned to his lawyer. "Kenneth, do something." Kenneth Shaw looked at the documents, then at his client. "Richard, there's nothing I can do. This is airtight. You have no legal recourse, and given the evidence of discrimination, I'd strongly advise you to accept the termination and walk away." "Walk away?" Richard's voice rose to a shout. "This is my life. This is everything I have." "No," Margaret said, standing up. "This was never yours. You inherited it. You squandered it. You used it as a platform to hurt people, and now it's over. You have two options. You can sell your remaining shares at market value, or you can hold them and watch as I transform this company into something better. Either way, you have no power here anymore." Richard Sterling looked around the room. Every face was either neutral or actively hostile. There was no support, no allies, no one coming to his rescue. For the first time in his life, he was powerless. "This isn't over," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll fight this. I'll expose you. You'll do nothing," Patterson said flatly. "Because if you try to fight this, we will release all the evidence we have of your discriminatory behavior. We'll make sure every news outlet in the country knows exactly what kind of person you are. Your reputation will be destroyed. You'll never work in this industry again. Is that really what you want?" Richard Sterling stood there, defeated, humiliated, broken. The man who had fired a janitor just 24 hours ago now had nothing. The woman he had humiliated now owned everything he valued. "Get out," Margaret said softly. "Security will escort you from the building. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings." Richard walked to the door, his lawyer trailing behind him. As he reached for the handle, he turned back one last time. "How?" he asked. "How did a janitor get $47 million? Margaret smiled. "My husband saved and invested wisely his entire life. He was a factory worker, the kind of man you would have looked down on, just like you looked down on me. He believed in patience, in hard work, in treating people with dignity. He taught me that real wealth isn't about money. It's about character, it's about integrity. It's about knowing that every person, regardless of their job or the color of their skin, has value." She walked closer to him. "You fired me yesterday because you thought I was worthless, because you thought people like me don't matter. But here's what you never understood, Mr. Sterling. The people you step on while climbing the ladder are the same people who hold that ladder steady. And when they decide to walk away, fall." Richard Sterling left the boardroom, he left the building, and he never came back. Margaret Williams stood at the window of her new office, the office that used to belong to Richard Sterling. She looked out over the Chicago skyline, at the city where she had cleaned floors and emptied trash cans, and been invisible for 3 years. She thought about the employees, hundreds of them, who would now work for a company that valued them. She thought about the changes she would make, the policies she would implement, the culture she would build. She thought about her husband, her mother, her grandmother, and all the people who had been told they didn't matter. The janitor had become the CEO. The invisible had become powerful. And the man who thought he was untouchable learned the hardest lesson of all. Respect isn't about titles or wealth or the color of your skin. Respect is earned through how you treat others, especially those who can do nothing for you. Margaret picked up the phone and called the HR department. "This is Margaret Williams. I want you to review the salaries of every janitor, every maintenance worker, every security guard in this building. I want their pay increased by 40%, effective immediately. And I want you to implement a new company policy. Every executive, including me, will spend 1 week each year working alongside our support staff. They need to understand that no one is too important to clean a floor or empty a trash can." As she hung up the phone, she smiled. Real change was coming to Sterling Tech Industries. And it all started because a racist CEO made the biggest mistake of his life. He underestimated a black janitor. He fired her in the morning. By the next morning, she owned his entire world. So tell me in the comments, have you ever seen karma work this fast? Have you ever witnessed someone get exactly what they deserved? Drop your stories below. And if you believe that hard work, integrity, and treating people with respect are what truly matter in this world, share this message. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that their time is coming, that the people who look down on them won't always have the power, that justice, even when it takes time, eventually finds its way home. The janitor bought the company, the CEO lost everything, and the world became just a little bit more fair.